Welcome to another installment of Going Mental. As I said in the previous episodes, part of this whole process is to really just see what we can do and explain things better for people, not just in terms of mental health, but also how our behaviours and the social aspect of people around us who we interact with can affect the quality of life that we have based on how we process what's happening to us and whether we can do that in a better way to kind of give us not just resilience, but kind of build what we really want to see happen. And as much as we're human beings and lots of things are beyond our control, there are quite a lot of things that obviously are within our control. And that kind of part of this is just about, putting some of those ideas forward and exploring different ways of dealing with. There's many ways to the top of the mountain, as I've mentioned before, with, people having different upbringings, people having different views, beliefs, all that kind of stuff, different people around them, different experiences. But ultimately there is a pattern that we all kind of share, and some of those aspects and the parts of how we use our brain in a more deliberate way, and how we maybe put in, different rituals and different repetitive things that we think will actually build a good pattern for how we can, respond to life in general and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of an informal way of doing that. As I said, the podcast isn't all just focusing on mental health. Like, it's also about really focusing on humanity, how sometimes, we're kind of baffled by, we do all these brilliant things, like there's all the classic kind of line that, they can put a man on the moon, and like stuff like, it was the suitcase, putting wheels on a suitcase. Like, it took years and years and years to actually do that. It wasn't that long ago that we used to have to carry these heavy suitcases with just like a handle. And it's funny because when you think about it, like, you go into hotels even years and years before they put wheels on suitcases, they actually have trolleys for porters, right, with wheels on them. You put the suitcase on the trolley and they push them, but nobody put two and two together till a lot later to really, put the wheels on the actual suitcase to make it a little bit easier to kind of maneuver and not have to pick up all the weight. So, sometimes we do these amazing things, but then there's also these little idiosyncrasy things where you kind of laugh about it and then that kind of thing. So, the same kind of thing, if we think of how we develop our patterns, if you have good experiences as a child, hopefully, they'll kind of get you into a mold where, you're a good citizen, you interact well with others, the social skills come, you've got good interaction, you're feeling loved and all that, and so you're feeling very safe. But obviously on the flip side, like in my policing days, you would see, unfortunately, kids who didn't have parents that were very loving, or if anything, sometimes the opposite completely, where they're not just neglecting the child, they're actually, doing stuff to the child that's certainly not very good in terms of trauma, in terms of, abuse, all that kind of stuff. There's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's so many different things that people unfortunately can do to their kids. So that all shapes, how that child kind of comes about. And if they can't kind of, we certainly feel sorry for those kids who are very young because they don't have any control over that. And so that affects how they interact with others. I mean, there's great studies that show that, animals would rather have crap care than no care. So they will cling to abusive parents because they don't know any different. The whole experience for them as a child in terms of, what they're kind of exposed to becomes a real problem. And so, they can't process it. They don't understand some of those things. So they know it's not great, but it's better than nothing. So, when we used to take kids away from parents as a cop for safety reasons for the child, the kids would run away from the foster parents to go back to those parents. So, some of these things doesn't sound like it should happen. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you want to go back to that? Same as, women that get beaten up by their husbands. There's a number of aspects that come with that. And from an outsider looking in who's maybe had, say, a normal upbringing, there's no real normal, but a better upbringing, if you want to put a term to it, it doesn't make sense to some of us that why would you do that? Why would you go back to that? It's not very good, but there's a number of things that come with that. There's a pattern that comes with it. There's a fear factor that comes with that. So understanding how our kind of safety mechanism can change based on what we've been exposed to, is really important. So I call it red brain, blue brain when I run these sessions, where I'm focusing and I'm being very, very almost summarizing here. There's a lot more to this. If you want to read more about this stuff, there's a really good book by Dr. Joe Dispenza called You Are the Placebo, where he focuses highly on much more neurological stuff than I'm about to. So I just want to kind of focus on our fight or flight kind of response, which I'll refer to as red brain, which is the amygdala part of the brain. We've all heard of this before, so it's nothing new, certainly not mine, but it just kind of gives you a nice, easy way to digest kind of what I'm suggesting. So think of red brain as our fight or flight mechanism, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is a big juicy part on top of our brains, where, you know, us as higher order primates have more of that than, say, lower order as we go down the food chain, so to speak, till we get to like lizards and, you know, reptiles who don't have any of that. So it's a very social part of the brain. It's kind of new compared to those animals, because over time it's got bigger and bigger and size. So like dolphins, you know, the big cats, primates who work together, lions and all that sort of stuff, they work together. They're very social. They have a connection. They look after their young. They do all those things. So, you know, we're understanding that and red brain can sometimes be a little bit at odds to you know, where we end up. So the red brain is purely designed to keep us out of harm's way, and it's kind of an emergency, and it'll go off automatically, and it's the same response all the time. It's not like degrees of it. It's like an alarm. The alarm goes off, we have a response, we're taking a deep breath, the blood starts to flow from our brain into our muscles, getting us ready for fight or flight to kind of deal with whatever that emergency is. And then, you know, that hopefully, you know, the emergency goes away, and now we're feeling calm, and we calm right down. But effectively, sometimes we can also use our blue brain to replay stuff like that. So when I was dealing with, you know, people who had PTSD, for example, they've had a very real, you know, event that was maybe, you know, put them in harm's way. And effectively, you know, they were fearful at the time. Then they got out of it, and now they're going home, and now the event's playing over in their head as a memory. So the brain is doing that deliberately. Like, you think about what could happen. Oh, I could have been killed, or, you know, my kids would be without a father or a mother. And so all these things, this thinking, blue brain conversations in your head can lead you to reinvigorate the red brain. So you're thinking of the things that could have happened, you're thinking of that fear again, and all the stuff that come with it. And sometimes you can even change the narrative of that. You're thinking of what could have happened, which actually didn't happen, but you can talk yourself into thinking that way, thinking of the future. So some people who are very fearful of the future, or they worry about things that may never happen, they develop this pattern over and over. Same as a person with PTSD. I'm not saying people who have that thought process necessarily have PTSD per se, but they certainly develop a pattern where, for whatever reason, things that happened to them when they were younger has allowed them to develop a pattern that's, you know, making them worry about things, just worry, highly anxious, anxiety. We put lots of terms to it, but essentially it's basically whatever brings us back into a red brain space where we worry about something as a potential harmful experience to us. And so we'll avoid those things. Like some people say, oh, you know, I don't like flying, so I don't want to go because, you know, planes, they'll look for things to kind of establish, I guess, a confirmation bias, as they say, where, you know, you look for things that, oh, there's been so many, you know, airplane crashes recently, or just the helicopter just went down yesterday with, you know, unfortunately, a couple of army people here in Australia. And so, you know, people will look for those things that can kind of justify why they might avoid doing those things. And so understanding kind of how we've developed that pattern is really important. So, you know, one of the key things in Joe Dispenza's book that I mentioned before is he talks about how, you know, when you're a child, taking everything in very passively, don't understand language yet, don't understand, you know, a lot of things, and everything's new. So as you're having those experiences, your brain is basically talking to your body's talking back to the brain, and you start to establish a connection between what's happening around you, how you're feeling about that. And the feeling's generally experienced in the body, right? So we have this view that, you know, we make decisions with our rational brain, but we actually don't. We actually make more decisions by how we feel about things, and that pattern between the brain and the body talking to each other, experiencing things as it happens. we start to create that pattern. And part of the way the brain works is about creating shortcuts for us to make it more easy. We're kind of cognitive minds. We want to use as little energy as possible. So when we're learning new things, like driving a car, for example, when you're first starting, you think about the road rules, you think about what your hands and your feet are doing, you're worrying about all these things, and it's really a very taxing experience. When you're first starting to learn, you can only do maybe half an hour to an hour. Now, when you get older like me, I'm in my 50s now, driven for, 30 odd years now, and it's automatic. You don't even think about driving. You could drive for hours, and if nothing, memorable happens, you just go on autopilot. You don't even think, you're just driving along. And that's what the brain's designed to do, to help you to do things better by creating a pattern. The brain doesn't have to really think about it, it's autopilot. But sometimes that can work against you if you're finding that, you go into a negative space in your brain, and this is where the PTSD kind of thing can come in, where you start to create a pattern that your brain and your body are now interacting, but you're getting stuck in red brain. It's constantly a red brain emergency experience, like a fire alarm that goes off all the time and you can't turn it off. It's not an emergency, but you can't turn it off. So effectively, it becomes harmful for you because, your cortisol levels go up, which isn't good for the body. You start to do different things. Your body's really getting ready for fight or flight all the time. So it's not digesting food as well as it should because it's trying to purge the body of having extra weight, making you lighter to be able to move and all that stuff. So constant things like that causes real problems for you as a long-term reaction to anything. So, you also got to think about, how we can use that to our benefit. So if you're finding that you're stuck and you're finding that you're going into a red brain space, doing things like a lot of people talk about journaling or, gratitude, having gratitude for something. Why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is what they call blue brain experiences. When the part of the brain that I mentioned, the blue brain, is where you do your conscious thinking. It's where you do your problem solving. And so when you are reflecting, which is what have I got to be thankful for? What's the gratitude? What am I got to be grateful for? When you start thinking that way, you're actually using that part of the brain and not your red part of the brain. And that can kind of break some of the patterns. So stuff like journaling and having that gratitude exercise uses a different part of the brain. When you're feeling like you're getting stuck, that's one method to do that. The other one is as you get, when you go to counseling and all that kind of stuff, a lot of the techniques are designed to get you to think with your blue brain, because that's where you actually make the most. No counselor can actually help you unless you get involved in some way. No one's going to get into your brain, change anything. They can give you techniques, just like what I'm talking about right now. They can give you ideas, but if you do nothing, nothing's going to change. They can't change it for you. It's the drink, lead the horse to water type stuff. So essentially understanding the basics of how red brain and blue brain operates. If you're getting stuck and you're not enjoying what's going on, you need to do something. That something can be many different things, right? What's the blue brain experience that work for you? When I talk to some people about, getting out and, maybe interacting with an animal or something. Some people hate animals. So a blue brain experience for one person might be the direct opposite, total red brain experience for another person. Someone who hates dogs or got bitten by a dog when they were younger is not going to have a good outcome for doing exactly the same thing, whereas other people love dogs or cats or whatever it is, and they want to be involved in that. So it's not for everybody. It's understanding yourself a bit, asking questions of yourself, like, what works for me? Do I like to go out in nature? Some people hate doing that. Some people just, hate insects and stuff all around them in nature. So that to them, it's not a good not a blue brain experience. It's actually a red brain experience. They're more worried about whatever it is. So, exploring those things, exploring your own thinking is a really, really key part to wanting to make anything happen. So, when I am working with people who've maybe been stuck, we start really exploring things that work for them. It's not about me identifying it, it's about them identifying it, but explaining to them what a blue brain experience is. People who have hope, some people find religion, they're all things that focus on the future. So if when I interviewed people for my book, when I was working on the book, which is based around, suicide prevention, especially for teenagers, it's about understanding what are the things that got them to the point where they were suicidal or had suicidal ideations, right? And so understanding that kind of go, okay, well, this kid bullied you. How was that experience? And then they tell you, you know, I felt horrible. I was ashamed, or, you know, someone, in the book I use an example where someone pours, you know, chocolate milk down a person's pants, makes it look like he basically pooed his pants. And so, you know, that embarrassment of the social aspect, people laughing at the person, all those things, they have an impact on the person, right? You could be the most mentally stable, had a great home environment, all those things, loving the environment, but now you come into an environment at work or at school and things happen, other people take, you know, do things to you, and understanding how you can deal with that is really a key part. But unfortunately, when you're really young, or not really young, but even in your teens, you're very vulnerable. So that's why, you know, you look at the statistics for suicide is really high in those age groups, and it's also higher for males. Like some of the males, you know, come from a very traditional background where the old, you know, suck it up princess, you know, you've got to kind of be this bravado and show that you're a male. You can't talk about emotions, you can't talk about the experience because you come across as a certain way, or you get negative talk about you. Oh, you're a sissy, oh, grow up, you know, get hardened up, all that stuff, right? So this has been going on for a long period of time. And so some of that stigma still hangs there. That's why a lot of people still don't talk about having mental health issues, or when I say issues, it's not even that, mental health experiences, right? Where maybe I'm not feeling at my best, things are getting to me, life is getting to you, or bad things happen, someone's died in your family. You know, these are normal emotions. These are normal experiences. And a lot of us, as we get older, especially, we're going to experience those. We're going to lose loved ones. We're going to lose animals that we, you know, pets that we've maybe had, all that kind of stuff. So understanding that, you know, none of us can just get a clear slide through, right? We might think that some people are getting it easier than others, but that's not necessarily the case. So it's important to kind of just think our way through all that a little bit. The other thing is when we think about behavior, right? Like in behavior in anywhere really, we watch lots of videos on YouTube and funny things like that. But you go, why is that person doing that? And there's lots of reasons. People who drink alcohol, if they're drunk, more likely to make silly decisions because certain parts of the brain are being kind of suppressed, and you're feeling more, you know, all that kind of stuff. So understanding even just little things like that. Even when we look at our laws, our work health and safety stuff, for example, I saw the other day, I was walking in Bunnings, and there's all these signs now on the travelators where you know, and you go, something's happened. You know, what's happened? Basically, if you put two and two together, there's all these signs, you know, warning, you must push your trolley off the travelator. I don't know what other people were doing. Maybe someone fell over. And so you kind of think of even our work health and safety laws, we kind of have to make these laws. We go, that's obvious. Why would we need to do that? But it's not always obvious. People make mistakes, people do silly things, and they don't necessarily think it through, right? So understanding kind of human behavior, laws that we want, a lot of that's kind of should be common sense, but it's not always common sense. Not everyone thinks the same way. So, you know, all those kinds of things has an impact on how we interact, how safe we are in the workplace, how safe we are outside as well. So when new people come into your workplace, especially younger people, it's important to point out some of those obvious things for them, right? Because they're not necessarily used to it. You go, oh, why would they have done that? And then you look back, like whenever we've done, and there's been an accident or something, even as a police officer, you go back and try and work out what happened. Was it person error? Was person drinking? You know, there's all these risk factors, and it's the same with anything else we do. And understanding, I guess, part of that, if you've got exposure, someone's been exposed to something like that, that we're working through it, we're talking through it, we're helping them get better at articulating what's happened, exploring that the emotions aren't a bad thing. And so part of that is really just, you know, doing those things to help people do things a little bit better. So look, hopefully you got something out of this. I'll do another one in the not too distant future. Thank you.